I'm 88. If living alone isn't possible, never choose a nursing home. Try this instead. My name is Celestine. I turned 88 in February, on a morning so cold the bird bath in my backyard had frozen solid overnight. I mention that detail because I remember standing at the kitchen window, looking at that disk of gray ice, and thinking how strange it was to still be here, still noticing things, still finding them worth noticing, still myself. 3 years ago, my son Wendell flew in from Portland and sat across from me at this same kitchen table where I'm writing now. He had a folder, printed pages with bullet points. He'd done research, which meant he was serious. "Mom," he said, "I just think we should look at some alternatives." He didn't say what alternatives. He didn't have to. I'd watched enough friends disappear into those alternatives to know exactly what the word meant. I want to tell you what happened after that conversation. Not because my story is remarkable, it isn't, but because I spent 2 years walking through every door that people told me was the right one, and I came out the other side having learned something that nobody in that folder ever mentioned. If you're my age or close to it, you may be circling the same decisions. If you're Wendell's age, you may be the one holding the folder. Either way, I hope what I learned saves you some of what it cost me. When I was 85, my husband Orville died after 51 years of marriage. I won't spend much time on that grief here, because grief that large doesn't compress into paragraphs. What I will say is that his absence changed the physical texture of the house in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not the silence. I'd expected silence. What I hadn't expected was how alone a body could feel inside rooms it had inhabited for decades. How the walls themselves seemed to lean in a little. For a while, I managed. I drove myself to appointments, tended the garden, cooked real meals. I told Wendell I was fine, and most mornings I believed it. Then the small failures began accumulating. I knocked a kettle off the stove and burned my forearm badly enough to scar. I missed a step coming off the porch and twisted my ankle so severely I couldn't walk properly for 6 weeks. I forgot, on 2 separate occasions, whether I had taken my blood pressure medication, which meant doubling a dose once and skipping it entirely another time. My doctor gave me a pill organizer and a look that said more than he was willing to put into words. By the time Wendell arrived with his folder, I had already been quietly afraid for months. Fear is an exhausting thing to carry alone. When he suggested I come stay with him and his wife Dorinda for a while, I felt something loosen in my chest. I packed 2 suitcases and flew west. The first weeks in Portland were genuinely good. Dorinda made breakfasts. Wendell drove me to the Japanese garden on a Tuesday afternoon just because I mentioned I'd like to see it. I felt held in the way that word actually means, like something had stopped the slow outward drift I'd been experiencing at home. I slept better than I had in a year. Then the rhythms of their life resumed around me, as they had to, and I became a feature of the house rather than a guest in it. Wendell travels for work 3 weeks out of 4. Dorinda runs a catering business that consumes her entirely from Thursday through Sunday. There were days I sat in the guest room and counted the hours until someone came home. There were evenings I set 3 plates at the dinner table out of habit, and then stood there looking at them. One night I heard Dorinda on a call with her sister. Her voice was low, but the house is not large. She said, "I love her, I do, but I feel like I'm being watched, like I have to perform being a good daughter-in-law every minute I'm here." She paused. "I know that sounds terrible." "I don't think it sounds terrible at all. I think it sounds like the truth, and the truth was that I had become a weight in a life already full of other weights." I told Wendell the following morning that I wanted to go home. He argued. I held firm. I had spent 8 decades building a self, and I wasn't willing to dissolve it quietly in a guest room in Portland. Back in my own house, I felt the rightness of the decision and the wrongness of my situation simultaneously. The house was mine. The problems were also mine. After some weeks of stubborn solitude, I hired help. A service that sent a rotating roster of aides for 20 hours a week. The first woman they sent was named Iphigenia, which she pronounced with brisk efficiency as Iffy, and she was capable and quiet, and I think she found me difficult. She reorganized my pantry according to a logic I couldn't decode, and threw away herbs I'd been drying myself for 15 years because she said they looked old. They were supposed to look old. That was the point. I said nothing. I am, unfortunately, from a generation that says nothing. Iffy was replaced by a young man named Crisanto, who was warm and energetic and who wanted to talk at length about a television program I had never watched. Then Crisanto was replaced by a woman named Rosamond, who was excellent in every respect, except that she arrived 40 minutes late on average and departed 40 minutes early, which meant I was essentially paying for 12 hours and receiving 8. When I raised this with the service, they apologized and sent someone else. That someone else lasted 3 weeks before calling in sick 4 times in a row and then simply not calling at all. Each new person required a period of introduction, during which my house felt invaded and my routines felt endangered. I am not, I discovered, as adaptable as I once believed. Or perhaps I am exactly as adaptable as a person my age should be expected to be, and the world that sells these services doesn't account for that. Either way, the cost, financial and otherwise, was becoming unsustainable. I ended the service in March of what I think of now as my worst year, and for a few weeks I simply sat in the situation without knowing how to change it. My daughter-in-law, Dorinda, despite her earlier exhaustion, called me every Sunday and had begun researching what she carefully called residential communities. She sent links, she described features, chef-prepared meals, on-site wellness centers, organized excursions. She spoke about one place in particular, a facility called Herondale, 40 minutes from my house, with a 4-star rating on a website I'd never heard of. I agreed to tour it, partly because I was tired of being afraid alone, and partly because I wanted to stop imagining it was worse than it was. It wasn't worse. It was exactly what I'd imagined, rendered in cheerful colors. The hallways were clean and smelled of industrial lavender. The staff were young and uniformly pleasant, in the way that people are pleasant when pleasantness is a job requirement. My room was larger than I'd expected and looked directly onto a courtyard where 4 residents sat in a loose circle without speaking to each other. The activities director told me about their calendar. Chair yoga on Monday, a film screening on Wednesday, bingo, she said bingo with genuine enthusiasm, on Friday afternoons. I am not a bingo person. I want to be clear about that. I have never been a bingo person. I taught graduate seminars in comparative literature for 30 years. I do not say that to be uncharitable to bingo. I say it because the version of me that Herondale was prepared to accommodate was not a version I recognized. The activities director walked me through the dining schedule. Breakfast at 7, lunch at noon, dinner at 5:15. I asked what happened if I wanted dinner at 7. She smiled. She said most residents find they're quite hungry by 5. I am not most residents. On the drive home, I watched the trees. It was October and they were turning. I thought about what it would mean to give this up. The drive, the trees, the freedom to look at things on my own schedule and call them beautiful without asking anyone's permission. I called Wendell that evening and told him it wasn't the right fit. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Okay, Mom, what do you want to do?" I told him I didn't know yet, but I knew it wasn't that. I went back to my house and I sat with the problem for a while without solving it. The solution arrived the way most real solutions do. Sideways, from a direction I wasn't looking. It was a November afternoon, and I was walking to the pharmacy on Aldercroft Street, which is exactly 9 minutes from my door at my current pace, and 11 if my hip is bad. I walk it slowly, and I notice things. The ceramic owl someone has placed on a windowsill, the wisteria vine that overtakes the fence near the corner every spring, a small boy who sometimes waves from an upstairs window. That afternoon I passed a woman standing on the front steps of the narrow yellow house on the corner of Aldercroft and Vine. She looked to be in her mid-40s, and she was standing very still in the cold, with her coat unbuttoned, holding her phone against her chest with both hands. Not looking at it, just standing there with it pressed against her sternum like something she was trying to keep warm. I had seen her before, in the way you see neighbors without knowing them. Her name, I later learned, was Philippa. She has a daughter named Wren, who is 6 years old, who has the particular gravity that some small children carry, an old soul seriousness that coexists unexpectedly with delight. I stopped. I don't know why exactly. I said, "Are you all right?" And she looked at me with the expression of someone who has been asked a question they no longer remember how to answer honestly, and she said, "Not especially." And I said, "I'm Celestine. I live down the block." And she said, "I know who you are." And then she said, "I'm sorry. That came out strange. I've been watching you for months. You always seem so certain about where you're going." I laughed. I told her that was the finest compliment anyone had given me in years, and that mostly what I was certain about was the location of the pharmacy. She told me, in the careful, abbreviated way of someone unaccustomed to being asked, that she was a translator, technical documents, 3 languages, working from home, solo parent since Ren's father relocated to another continent with minimal forwarding address. She had no family nearby. She had been managing with an after-school program that had recently raised its rates past what she could absorb, and the new arrangement she'd found had already fallen through twice in 2 weeks. She had a deadline the following morning, and no one to collect Ren from school at 3. "I collect her," I said. "I'm walking that direction anyway." Philippa looked at me with something that was not quite suspicion and not quite hope. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know," I said. "That's rather the point." Ren and I walked home the long way that first afternoon because she wanted to show me a specific crack in the pavement near the library that she said looked exactly like a dragon sleeping. She was correct. It did. We talked about dragons and about the book she was reading, which featured a girl who could hear what objects were thinking, which Ren considered plausible. By the time we reached her door, I felt something I had not felt in a considerable while. I felt necessary. That evening, Philippa came to my door with a container of soup, roasted red pepper, which I would not have chosen for myself and which turned out to be extraordinary. She stood in the doorway and said, "This is a small thing, I know." I said, "No, it isn't." She came in. We had soup together and talked for 2 hours about things I can't fully reconstruct. Her work, my work, Ren's dragon crack, the way cities change, the way people do and don't. I went to sleep that night with the particular contentment of someone who has been genuinely listened to. What happened next built itself slowly, the way worthwhile things do. I became Ren's afternoon person, the one who collected her, who had biscuits available, who let her tape drawings to my refrigerator until the surface was more drawing than appliance. Philippa, as her schedule allowed, became my technological conscience. She migrated my bill payments online, showed me how to order groceries through a service that delivers to the door, helped me identify which of my medications had interaction concerns I hadn't known to ask about. Philippa's neighbor, a retired plumber named Augusto, who I met through her one evening, came by after hearing about my unreachable smoke detector battery. He replaced it in 4 minutes and refused any payment except the information that I could call him if something else needed attention. I have called him twice since. He came both times. A woman from the community garden 2 streets over, Mirembe, began leaving vegetables on my porch on Saturdays because she grows more than she can use and had heard I was a decent cook. I began leaving her portions of what I made with them. This is an arrangement so logical and so human that I cannot explain why it took me 2 years and several $1,000s to find my way to it. What I learned, what I'm still learning, is something that resists being stated simply, though I'll try. There is a version of needing help that costs you your personhood, and there is a version that doesn't. The version that costs you is the one organized around dependency. You go where the service is, you follow the schedule, you consume what is provided, you become a recipient. The version that doesn't cost you that is organized around exchange. You bring something, others bring something. And what results is not a transaction, but a texture, a fabric of small reliabilities that holds you without confining you. I am still limited. I always will be. My hip is worse this year than last. There are stairs I no longer trust. I keep a list of questions for my doctor that is never fully resolved before new questions arrive. I have nights when the house is very quiet, and I miss Orville with a physical intensity that has not diminished with time. I do not pretend otherwise, but I am not invisible. Wren draws pictures of me. She has given me a name in the private language she is developing. She calls me the Bird Lady, which is apparently a compliment, connected to something I said once about watching the wren that comes to my garden. She gives me her complete 6-year-old attention, which is lavish and serious, and which I receive the way you receive a gift that is exactly right. Philippa and I have dinner together once a week now. We have argued about books, about how to make a proper bechamel, about whether it is possible to translate poetry without losing the thing that makes it poetry. I have not resolved all of these arguments in my favor. This is one of the great pleasures of the arrangement. I am not suggesting that community solves everything, or that my particular situation is replicable, or that need is not real and sometimes overwhelming. There are people my age who require medical support I cannot approximate. There are nights when proximity to professional care is not a luxury, but a necessity, and I don't diminish that. What I'm saying is narrower, and I think more important. That before you accept the choices you've been handed, it's worth asking what you still have to offer. Because that question, what can I still give, turns out to be the one that changes everything. I am 88 years old. I live in my own house. I know the name and specific temperament of my neighbor's cat. I have an ongoing argument about bechamel. I am Wren's bird lady. I walk to the pharmacy in 9 minutes, 11 on bad days, and I notice the owl on the windowsill every single time. I have not disappeared. I do not intend to. If you are where I was 3 years ago, frightened, trying to be sensible, reading your son's printed pages, I want you to know that the sensible thing and the right thing are sometimes the same, and sometimes they are not. And the work of figuring out which is not a small thing. It is, actually, the whole thing. I hope you find your way to it. I hope you find your Philippa, your Wren, your Augusto with a spare afternoon and the right wrench. I hope you find, as I did, that the world will meet you part way if you will only walk out your door and stand still long enough to let it find you. Take your time. I mean that in every sense. Take all of it. The years remaining are not a diminished version of the years before. They are their own thing, strange and bounded, and sometimes frightening and, if you can manage it, genuinely yours.